Good morning, all of our beautiful My Jewish learners. We're joined today by Rabbi Sarah Bracha Gershuny, and we're going to take a look at the week's Torah portion. Feel free to share where you're tuning in from in the chat, thinking of all the people on the Northeast coast that may have experienced an earthquake this morning. So, good time for a check-in. Rabbi Gershuny, whenever you're ready, I'm excited to learn too.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. So, as I like to do, we'll just start with a very brief summary of what is in Parashat Shemini, which is we're now in the third parasha of the middle book of the Torah, Leviticus, which means accompaniment, or about those who accompany, i.e., the priests. This is Leviticus chapters 9 through 11. So, if you know something that happens in this parasha, just pop it in the chat and we'll just do a very quick summary. As well as where you're calling in from.
Sorry, I missed that. Did you want me to share the source sheet in the chat yet?
No, I'm just asking folks to put into the chat what happens in this parasha. Right. The most famous thing is that the sons of Aaron are consumed when they go to offer a strange fire before God. And then what happens next is we find out various of the species of animal that we are and aren't allowed to eat. Where does this occur? What's the context within which Aaron's sons are consumed by fire? I can see if I can turn my volume up. So all of this takes place within the context of the sanctuary, the Mishkan, being inaugurated. At the end of last week's parsha, we learn about how the sanctuary is to get set up, and this takes 7 days of sacrifices, and according to some commentators, also the Mishkan being collapsed and rebuilt every day. And in fact, according to one commentator, it being collapsed and rebuilt 3 times a day for these 7 days, while Aaron and his sons live in this liminal space of the Mishkan, which is the tabernacle, which is getting set up. And then on the 8th day, there's an inauguration. These sanctification rites are completed, and as we'll see, fire descends from heaven, and the whole system is initiated. So that's the context in which Aaron's sons, Nadav and Avihu, go and offer their unauthorized offering and get strafed. However, what we're going to look at today is specifically the very first verse of this parasha and the resonance of the number 8 in the Jewish tradition, because all of this occurs on the 8th day. So let's make a blessing for Torah study, and then we'll dive in to some discussion of eights. So I'll make a blessing on behalf of all of us. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, great teacher, who connects us through this practice of getting deep with the words of Torah. May it be your will that we and our descendants and our students and the descendants of our descendants and the students of our students all enjoy this practice. The Torah is sweet in our mouths, and we continue to pass on this chain of tradition, all of us understanding and knowing the Torah and bringing more of it into the world for its sake, for your sake, and for our sake. Blessed are you who is teaching Torah to us right now. Baruch Ata Adonai HaMelamed Torah L'Amo Yisrael. So here we are at the very beginning of this parasha. As we see, the very first verse is Vayehi, and it happened, B'yom HaShemini, on the 8th day. that Moses called to Aaron and to his sons and to the elders of Israel. And as I've mentioned, the whole system begins to get initiated. So before we go further, I just want to have a quick pop quiz, and you can put it into the chat. Where else in our tradition do we get the number 8? I must tell you, although it's the most famous thing that happens in this Parshat, we're not really going to be discussing Nadav and Avihu. Okay, so things that happen. Number 8, circumcision. It happens on the 8th day, classically, of a baby boy's life. Brit Milah. Hanukkah is 8 days long. I will give you the link to the source sheet in a minute, but first we're doing a brainstorm. Yes, some festivals. Which festivals are 8 days long? Well, in fact, Passover is 7 days long. We celebrate it for 8 days because of this thing of adding a day for the diaspora. But Pesach and Sukkot are actually 7 days long. However, on the 8th day at the end of Sukkot, we get this extra special day called Shemini Atzeret, Shemini Chag Atzeret. Someone's bringing us Deuteronomy 16:3. You must remember the day of your departure from Egypt, all the days of your life, 8 days outside of the Holy Land. I'm not sure how. I need to look that up. You're saying this happens 8 days before their entry into the land, which is great. I will give you a link to the text in a minute after we've done this brainstorm. According to Maimonides, actually, Shavuot is also supposed to be 8 days long, which is interesting. He somehow manages to learn out that Shavuot's supposed to be 8 days. Any other 8s that you can think of in our tradition? Yeah, we've said Brit Milah. Okay, so the temple menorah actually has 7 days. Seven lights on it, right? We have it in that song that we sing at the end of the very end of the Seder. We talk about the 8. Okay, Jay says 8 is the number of new beginnings in Jewish thought. Oh, 8 people on the ark. Interesting. Hadn't thought of that one. Good. All right. Well, we'll see a few more in a minute. But first, let me ask you a different question. Oh, great. Excellent. Yes. According to Maimonides, there are 8 levels of giving tzedakah. 8 ways to give charity, each better than the last. Beautiful. So great. That's another 8 that we have. Fantastic. So, but first, before we discuss more 8s, tell me about 7s. What 7s do we have in the Jewish tradition, and what's the resonance of the number 7? Carol says 8 is bridging into eternity. So we'll get in a second. Okay, great. We'll talk in a second about the difference between the 7 and the 8, and what is the move that we're making as we go from a 7 into an 8. So 7 is holy completion, and it references the 7 days of creation plus Shabbat, the sort of initial cycle or sequence. Great, yeah, 7 branches of the menorah, 7 days of Pesach and Sukkot. And I'm going to come back. 7 days of mourning, fantastic. And then opposite 7 days of mourning, we also have 7 days of the wedding. We have 7 days of saying 7 blessings for the new couple. And the counting of the Omer, we count 7 sets of 7 days. 7 weeks. Yes, and of course, Shabbat is the really big one. Another set of 7s that no one's mentioned yet are there are not only 7 different elements in the lulav bundle, that we shake. 1 lulav, 1 etrog, 3 myrtles, and 2 willows. But we shake it in 7 directions, including within. So that's another understanding of 7, is that there are 7 directions, including within. Right? So add 7 sefirot if you count from Chesed down to Malchut. Yep. And so let's come back to this question of what is the move that's being made as we go from 7 to 8. So a couple people already said something about this. 8 is bridging into eternity. 8 is a number of new beginnings in Jewish thought. 8 is one more than 7. It's above nature. It's supernatural and miraculous. 8 requires our action or buy-in. 7 is one above 7, the supernatural, above the 7-day cycle of nature. Anything else? Anything else you want to say about 8s? Well, unsurprisingly, perhaps. Okay, great. So, thank you, Richard. So someone else is pointing out that we not only have the count of 7 cycles of 7 weeks during the Omer every year between Pesach and Shavuot, but we also have the cycle of 7 sets of 7 years. We have a cycle of 7 years, the Shemitah, and then after the cycle of 7 sets of 7 years, we get what's called the Yovel, the Jubilee, in the 50th year. Exactly. So just as 8 implies coming to more than the completion of a cycle, but transcending that cycle and going into a different dimension, similarly, the number 50, which is not 7 plus 1, but 7 times 7 plus 1, implies the same thing. So we have the Jubilee, as we'll see, as the number 50, and also the holiday of Shavuot itself, when we celebrate Revelation. This is the point. In the Greek name is in fact Pentecost, which means count of 50, and it's on this 50th day that we go beyond and we bridge between heaven and earth, receiving revelation. Oh, thank you, Richard. Good point. Moses was married to Tzipporah, who was one of 7 daughters, which the Kabbalists like to connect to the 7 Sefirot. And Ellen points out that the sign for infinity on its side is an 8. So we'll come back to that, this idea of the connection between 8 and infinity. Beautiful. And of course, yeah, we have Hanukkah, which is 8 nights, 8 lights, 8 days. All right, at this point, I am going to give you the source sheet, and everyone can open it for themselves. And I'll also show it on the screen. Firstly, just to this is a commentary from Rabbi Naama Kelman, where she points out, why are numbers so important? Why do we need to count? Oh, how much fun it is playing with numbers. Numbers are multi-layered in their meaning, and Hebrew offers layers of mystery meaning, starting with the word for number itself, which is mispar. The root of mispar is samach pei resh, the same root as sephira, as in Sefirat HaOmer, the counting of the Omer, when we count the 7 weeks between Passover and Shavuot. Another key word derived from this root is sipur, the word for story. And our stories are played out through our rituals and rites. Our rituals hold us accountable for our stories, and our stories must count as ritual, which I think is very interesting. She brings in this connection itself between Sefer, which is book, Sipur, which is story, Sepira, which is counting, and then of course Sephira, which is our kabbalistic concept of aspects or remits, midot of the divine. Oh, good. Yes. Also, 7 years that Jacob had to work to marry each of his wives. Great. Okay, so we already talked about this. We're going to look today in particular at the commentary of Rabbeinu Bachya, who lived in Zaragoza in Spain between 1255 and 1340. His dates got Hebraified. And he is one of the most famous ancient commentators, well, I guess medieval commentators on the Torah, on the Bible. And this translation is available on Sefaria. This is his commentary on the hour verse, the very first verse of Parashat Shemini, where unsurprisingly, perhaps he has the opportunity to talk quite a lot about the number 8. However, where he begins, as we did, is with the number 7, and he brought a verse that nobody mentioned yet, which is from the book of Proverbs, a not very accessible book of the Bible, since it's written in difficult Hebrew and doesn't make very easy sense. You have to really study it. But one of the things it says in the book of Proverbs is that wisdom has built her house hewing 7 pillars. And obviously the mystics get into this as what these 7 pillars are. However, you'll notice, well, we're not going to unpack this much now, but he begins actually with talking about 7s, and then here we are in his fourth comment on this. He tells us that the Midrash interprets the word Shiva, 7, literally. And he says the reason is that the number 7 has equal significance in the celestial regions and terrestrial regions. There are many commandments in the Torah where the number 7 plays a significant role. And I'll just comment quickly, there are also 7 luminaries in the solar system that can be seen with the naked eye from Earth: the Sun, the Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Could be seen by the ancients without telescopes. So another potential connection of 7 with the celestial is through these 7 celestial bodies that can be seen. There are also, as the rabbis like to point out, 7 sense apertures in our faces. We have 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 nostrils, and a mouth. So that's another set of 7 on the terrestrial plane. And someone points out that 7 is a prime number. Very good. Whereas 8 is definitely not a prime number. It's a very multipliable number. So he gives us a list of 7s. I think we've covered all of them. Shabbat is the 7th day. The Jubilee year is the conclusion of 7 cycles of 7 Shemitah years, although actually it's the year after. Both the festival of Passover and Tabernacles, Pesach and Sukkot, consist of 7 days. And then this is where I got this idea that the 7 elements in the lulav. As we already noted, we observe a period of Shiva, 7 days of mourning. We also have 7 days of Sheva Brachot, of celebration after a couple gets married. The common denominator of all these commandments or practices involving the number 7 is that they somehow symbolize the 7 days in which God created and completed the universe. He also points out that the prophet Bilam, who we'll read about in the book of Numbers, also builds 7 altars when he's amping himself up to bring down this prophecy about the Israelites. It is not surprising, therefore, that there were 7 days of inauguration for the Mishkan. God himself referred to them as such. The spiritual origin of these rites involving the number 7 is one and the same. Okay, so this is what we've already said, basically. 7 is sacred, but it indicates a sequence. However, what he's going to say about the 8th is that it not only indicates going beyond, but it actually indicates going back to the number 1. 8 implies unity or unification in some way. This is, and he we'll see at the end of this passage, says that this day of the inauguration of the sanctuary was the first time that many of these things happened. He also brings a number of eights, which nobody has yet mentioned, which are quite detailed and particular, so I'm not that surprised that we didn't pick up on them. Where else do we have eights? Well, we actually have them quite a lot in connection with the Mishkan. We're in the fifth midrash, his fifth comment here, Vayhi b'yom hashmini. The high priest wore 8 garments. Regular priests had 4 garments. The high priest had an additional 4 with his special hat and the breastplate and so forth. The number of fragrances constituting the anointing oil and the incense was also 8. The anointing oil, similar to the high priest in his 4 and 4. The anointing oil had 4 fragrances, and then there were 4 additional fragrances going into the incense. He also points out that there were 8 staves used to carry the furniture of the temple, 2 for the holy ark, 2 for the incense altar, 2 for the table for the showbread, and 2 for transporting the copper altar, the big altar, the animal sacrifice altar. So you get 8 staves there. And he points out also that just as we consider a child fit for Brit Milah on the 8th day, so also animals couldn't be sacrificed before they were 8 days old. And he points out also that there are 8 types of psalm, possibly 8 types of musical instrument, or 8 modes, or forms in some way, or like we say, largo, adagio, allegro, whatever. We don't know exactly what these words mean, but there we have 8 descriptor words for types of psalms, and he lists them. And you'll notice that the 8th of these, al hasheminit, is literally on the 8th. Nobody really knows what these descriptors mean. The Sheminit but the Sheminit obviously once again references Shemini, 8. So the 8th of these types of psalms is on the 8th. Could this be an 8-stringed instrument? Some people think that's what that means. It's an 8-string instrument. Other people say it's an 8-noted scale. No, we don't really know. However, we have 8, which is interesting when we think about the fact that our scale also, the number 8 is very important in our Western construction of music too. And then he goes on to say that this 8th day was the first time that various things happened. It was the inaugural day of the temple, and it was the first time actually that the priestly blessing was given, which is not explicit in the Parashat. It says that Moses and Aaron came out and blessed the people, and Rashi and others comment that what they were blessing the people with was the priestly blessing we get described in Numbers 6, Yivarechecha Hashem v'yishmerecha, etc. May the Lord bless you and keep you. But this, according to the commentators, was the blessing. It was the day on which the heavenly fire descended. It was the first time that the new moon offering was offered. It was also the first time that we get instructions about meat eating, as we see from the later part of this parasha. It was the first day that the Shekhinah took up residence on earth, and it was the first day of the inaugural offerings of the princes to the tabernacle, starting with the tribe of Judah. And it was also the beginning of the system within which people with ritual impurity had to leave the camp, which also, by the way, is another set of 7s and 8s. These periods of counting 7 days of purification, and then on the 8th day, the person being readmitted to the camp, person with sara'at, but we could also mention nida, the menstrual purification rites. Right. Someone is also pointing out that there are 8 notes in an octave. In fact, there are 7 notes in an octave. So what the 8 does is, well, there are actually 12 notes in an octave, but in our scale, da 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 da, there are 7 notes, and then the 8th is representing holding everything and moving it up to the next dimension. And we can think not just of sound, but also of light. does the same thing. What we think of as the rainbow is 7 distinct wavelengths of light, and the rainbow transcends and includes, so does white light. White light is in fact refracted into these 7 bands of color that we can see. Light itself is that 8th, which holds the 7 wavelengths of refraction within it. Beautiful. Yes, octave. Oct is the Latin for 8, just as in Hebrew. Shemini is the Hebrew for 8. All right, so good. There was one other 8 that I came across that no one's mentioned yet, which is that Jacob's sons by his wives, not by his concubines, is 8. Anyone else got any more 7s or 8s that they want to? Oh, great. Oh, nice. Thank you, Richard. So in the 10 Commandments, the 8th commandment is "You shall not steal." And Ibn Ezra, another great medieval commentator, connects this to the sphere of the sun and indicates force. So I'm curious, probably you know, is Ibn Ezra connecting a different luminary to each of the commandments? That's very interesting. I'd never come across that. Oh, 7 words in the first verse of the Torah. Very nice. Lois, what do you mean when you ask if we're currently in the 8th day? Say more about that. I mean, maybe. That is a big question, Sherry. And why were men in those days allowed to have multiple wives? I mean, the literal answer to that is patriarchy. Good question. We're not going to get into it right now. The 8th plague is a plague of locusts, I believe. So there were 10. I will point out, though, also that though we have 10 fingers and 10 toes, we the webbing between our fingers and toes is 8. And at least on our hands, we really have 8 fingers. The thumbs are auxiliary, very useful. Not knocking the thumbs, love the thumbs. But in a sense, we have these 8 functional digits right here. But you can slice and dice 10 into 8 in various ways. I will say though also, as we mentioned before, this idea that you can see 7 heavenly bodies from the earth. The 8th is the earth. The 8th is the standing point from which we see all these things. And just as we mentioned before that we have 7 sense apertures in our faces, when you bring in the idea of 8, I think it implies also the presence of the other set of apertures in our bodies, which obviously there's more than one, but we get into the realm of excretion and also reproduction, and where the stability of our 7 sense organs actually gives rise to building something more in bringing new life into the world. I will point out that men are in fact able to have multiple partners today, as are women, in answer to this comment. All right, so I'm going to, oh yes, we talked for just a second about how 50 is also part of this transcending, just as 8 transcends 7, 50 transcends 7 times 7. And we mentioned already the Jubilee. I will point out that the 8th Sephirah, counting from the bottom, Shechina, Yesod, Hod, Netzach, Tiferet, Gevurah, Chesed, the 8th Sephirah is Bina, who is called the Great Mother. Don't worry if you don't know too much about Kabbalah, just dwell on this for a brief second. Bina, the 8th Sephirah, is seen as birthing all of these other Sephirot, and it is she who is identified with the Jubilee, the 50th, the Yovel. One of her names is Mi, which means who? Who is that? Which in numerology and gematria is equivalent to the number 50. And I'll bring you just a tiny little bit from the Sha'arei Ora, which is a wonderful medieval text, which describes how the names of God map onto the Sephirot and their functions within the divine system. As he explains, the Yovel or Bina, this eighth Sephirah, indicates all manner of freedom and redemption. Within the system of the seven, he says, we're still vulnerable to getting detached and disconnected from God. And then sometimes we don't have the shefa, the flow of divine power that we need for everything to be gravy, and everything. And when we're cut off from Bina, we need to find other ways to get connected to God. However, when we're connected to Yovel, then the words he uses, cherut ugeula, freedom and redemption, all kinds of freedom and redemption are found. And the flow comes to all these lower worlds. And in a future time, all of us righteous will be ascended and connected to Bina. And this is called the mystery of Olam Haba, the world that is coming. And all will go forth in freedom and be redeemed from every kind of destruction and suffering. So, as we've been saying, the 8 or the 50 is the transcending of ordinary cyclical reality, where we go into a place of redemption and that which is beyond. We go beyond ordinary time into non-ordinary time, which we call Olam Haba, or the Jubilee, which is the Great Redemption. All right, so this, I just did a little bit of a search on the numerological resonances of the number 8, and I'm not a great numerologist, but I am interested. Obviously, I see these frequencies of 7 and of 8. So this is just some stuff that I got from the internet, edited together. The number 8 is both spiritual and materialistic. It resembles the symbol of infinity and deals with the recycling travel path of energy. 8 is all about balance too. The symmetrical shape represents a link between beginning and end, and how nothing is ever really over. So we get this idea of infinity. You'll also note that while 7 is prime, 8 is subdividable twice, into 4 and then into 2. So it has a great balance within it as well. For every blessing that 8 receives, it puts one back out to the universe. When things are balanced, they feel stable, controlled, and supported, which is the most productive environment for the 8 to work in. Great deal of stability. The number 8 resonates with authority, self-confidence, inner strength, inner wisdom, social status, ego, and at the same time has a love for humanity and a desire for peace. Power, strength, ambition, efficiency, discipline, reality, money, finances, truth, integrity, abundance, and prosperity. I'm interested with the connection here between Ibn Ezra's identifying the 8th commandment with the power of the sun, all of which seems to have a similar kind of idea or something going on to all these words about power and strength, inner authority and self-confidence. In Chinese culture, the number 8 is considered the luckiest number of all, and is purposefully worked into wedding dates, birth dates, addresses, and finances. So that's pretty interesting. We've already talked about the 8. Oh, just by the way, as well as the scale being an octave, there are 88 keys on the piano. And I put in here a link to someone on the internet who talks more about the Kabbalah of music on the piano. You can go look that up. Okay, so there's a principle in numerology that you add up all the integers of any given number, and that gives you their final number. So for instance, the number 24, you add the 2 and the 4, and it gives you a 6. All right, so look what happens when we get multiples of 8. No other number does this. The first multiple of 8 is 8, right? Obviously. The second multiple of 8 is 16, which you add it together, you get 7. The third multiple of 8 is 24. You add them together, you get 6. 32 gives you a 5. 40 gives you a 4. 48 gives you a 12, which gives you a 3. 56 yields a 2. 64 yields a 1. Then 72 gives you a 9. 80 gives you an 8. 88 gives you a 7. 96 gives you a 6, and so it continues. So in fact, the number 8 does contain all the other numbers within it in a repeating sequence. Very interesting, right? I just thought of this the other day when I was just musing on this topic in preparation for this. And I've been turning it over in my head to see if I can figure out mathematically why that's true. I have not yet succeeded. If anyone knows, by all means, put it into the chat. One further 8 that I'll just touch on briefly is this idea of the Octogrammaton, which I got from this guy who wrote the article on the Kabbalah of music and piano. Can anyone spot what's going on here? Here's a picture of the Octogrammaton. Can anyone see what that is? You might be familiar with the word tetragrammaton, which is the 4-letter name.
I do want to point out we've had a couple people in the chat specifically ask about the origins of number mysticism in Judaism. So if there's any way you can maybe shed a little bit of light on that, I think it will be helpful for some of our learners.
I don't know. I mean, it's the one thing that is one thing that that the if you take what's called a source critical approach to who wrote the Torah, they will point out that the priestly author, who obviously is responsible for much of the book of Leviticus, but is also responsible for what we read at the very beginning of the Torah with the 7 days of creation, that this author is obsessed with sevens. That to them, 7 is very big. And 8 is lurking in the background there, all these ways. So, I mean, why? Maybe because it is like actually patterned into the fabric of reality. Maybe because we like to count on our fingers. I don't know. I'm just noticing these patterns and I'm curious about it. Someone points out that the 8th letter of the Hebrew alphabet is chet, which is shaped like a gateway and is considered the letter of the portal. Very nice. Very nice. So yes, exactly. The Octogrammaton is the name Hashem and the name Adonai mixed together. So if you've ever seen in a traditional prayer book, the God's name is written as Yud Yud or Yud Chuk Chuk Yud, that's actually indicating the presence of this name, meaning it's Yud Hey Vav Hey, and which we don't pronounce when we see the name Yud Hey Vav Hey written. We pronounce it as Aleph Daled Nun Yud Adonai. And if you interweave those letters together, you get, again, like the high priest's garments and the incense and the anointing oil. 4 and 4 mixed together gives us this extra special frequency of what this guy calls the Octogrammaton. Yud, Yud, Aleph, Hey, Daled, Vav, Nun, Hey, Yud. And that's why the name of God is written Yud Yud in the Siddur, which I always wondered about when I was a kid, and I never found out until I got to rabbinical school. I want to bring in a couple final ideas here. I know this is like a whistle-stop tour to like, whoa, blowing your mind. Maybe. Or maybe you're like, oh, whatever. There's a wonderful something else that Rabbi Bachya brings in his discussion of the 8. And this is how he brings this idea that it's not time to rejoice in this world, because there's always another side to whatever's going on. And you may be happy right now, but terrible things may be just around the corner. Sorry to tell you this. And then he goes through all these biblical characters. It seemed to be going so well, and then they suffered all these terrible misfortunes. Abraham was chosen by God, but then he lost his son, and then he lost his other son, and then he lost his wife, and then he was he was swindled to pay an astronomical price for a place to bury her. And he goes through all the ancestors with they were elected, they had a special relationship with God, it was amazing, but then they really had to contend with terrible struggles and sufferings. And the person that he lands on is Elisheva, bat Aminadav. So who is Elisheva? She was the wife of Aaron the high priest. She doesn't get a speaking part, but she does get named, as she was the mother of Nadav and Avihu. She was the brother-in-law of Moses, and she was the sister of Nachshon, who was the prince of the tribe of Judah, who was the first prince to make an offering in the temple. So he points out, on this day of the inauguration of the Mishkan, wasn't she like the happiest person on earth? Her whole family was like getting massively celebrated. She saw her husband become the high priest. Her brother-in-law Moses became the king of Israel. 2 of her sons became deputy high priests. Her brother Nachshon became the first of the princes to be honored with bringing the sacrifices by laymen. But even she did not remain long in such a blissful state of joy, seeing that 2 of her sons, Nadav and Avihu, here we come full circle, went to offer an offering to God, and they themselves were brought out burnt. Thus you may very well say, following this verse from Ecclesiastes, do not be frivolous, or possibly do not break out into dance, because it's not time to be happy yet. You never know. You never know. The other side of things is always present. So I think this is interesting when we think about the shape of the 8 and how it has these 2 balanced halves. As in our Arabic numeral, there's this implication that 8 also sort of implies its opposite, or has its shadow side, and that is part of its wholeness. I'll just bring one more idea, because it kind of ties it all together. This Parshat also contains the very midpoint of the Torah if you're counting by letters. And guess what the middle letter of the Torah is? Does anybody know? Well, I'm about to tell you. It is in fact the letter Vav, which is the great letter of connection. The letter Vav, the word Vav itself means hook, and it's written as a channel between heaven and earth. It's a great connector. And it's the letter Vav which is in the middle of the word, meaning belly. It's in our section about the things you shouldn't eat. Don't eat anything that crawls on its belly. Al Gachon, the Vav of Gachon. And when you see it written in the Torah scroll, it is actually written slightly enlarged to point out that this is the very middle letter of the Torah. Anyone else notice anything about this word Gachon, which means belly or middle, right? Well, we only have 1 minute, so I will just say, before that Vav there, you get the Chet, which is the 8, and after that Vav there, you get the Nun, which is 50. Right, Gachon, that's a Chet. It's just written, it's written slightly differently in Torah script, and that's a final Nun. So surrounding the 6 representing the material dimensions of up, down, left, right, forward, and back, we have surrounding it these transcendent portals of the 8 and which is the 7 plus 1, and the 50, which is the 7 times 7 plus 1. So, my friends, it is now 14 minutes past the hour. We have 1 minute for anyone to chime in with anything else they want to say, but I will give us all a blessing that we should transcend and include. We should go deeper on this Shabbat perhaps than we've ever been before. We should find the 8, the Chet, as the portal into a dimension of consciousness which goes beyond that which goes round and around. I didn't have time, unfortunately, to read everything in the chat. Mara, I hope you'll save it so that we can all benefit from reading it later. It was fantastic to learn together this morning, and thank you for bearing with me as we investigate a little bit of numerology within the Jewish tradition. Yeah, the source sheet, it's up on Sefaria. You should be able to find it. It's called Shemini. What's it called? Shemini, the Sacred 8. And I wish you with that a Shabbat Shalom. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend.